Welcome back, everybody. Again, this is Bryce Roush from the Wellness 360 conference, and I would now like to introduce our next speakers who are going to actually be speaking about food and stress management during these trying times, which I know is something I think we could all probably benefit from. I think they're calling it the COVID-15 right now, of what a lot of people are experiencing. And so I'd like to introduce Anne and Mary.
Okay, thank you so much. I want to thank Joanna and Bryce and Omar and Angela. And I missed the last person's name, so I apologize for that. I'm very thankful to be here today. My name is Mary Franczek, and I'm actually an associate professor of nursing at Northern Michigan University in Marquette, Michigan. And yes, we still have snow. That picture is taken of the Chocolate River in Marquette 1 week ago. And that is not an April Fool's joke. That's what it looked like. In addition to being an instructor, I love about the importance of self-care. I have a business, Integrative Wellness Consulting, and I would like to introduce my good friend and colleague, Dr. Ann Stein. Ann will be speaking in a couple slides. Ann is a family nurse practitioner, and she's actually got a doctorate. She also is a certified occupational health nurse involved in workplace wellness. So we bring many years of wellness experimentation and research. So thank you for attending. Interruptions from the pandemic. Well, like others have said, the Wellness 360 conference. So thank you. The Wellness 360 conference was postponed. The one thing we want to mention is that in October, we will be bringing a tool that you will be able to do a self-assessment on your wellness. It's the Integrative Health and Wellness Assessment Form. We have permission from the International Nurse Coach Association to use that with participants in October. And without further ado, I am going to let Ann take over. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just having a few technical difficulties here trying to get these slides. Okay, so as Mary said, we're going to be talking about not only the pandemic and the stress it causes on us, but healthy ways that we can manage the stress, specifically with food. When we look at food and how our bodies process food, our bodies have actually changed very little from the time that we were cave people. We look at the three macronutrients, fats, carbs, and proteins, and those are all meant to keep our bodies healthy, but our body also has other systems in place in order to keep us safe. And today's processed foods don't work quite so well with the way our bodies were initially programmed to basically stay alive in front of that saber-toothed tiger when we were programmed to either run or to fight. So cravings that we see, especially when we're under stress, we're going to explain why those things come about, like cravings for fats and sugars. So when we're under stress, our body's safety mechanisms start throwing out hormones. One of the main hormones is adrenaline. We heard this mentioned by Angela earlier. Actually, cortisol is one of the ones she mentioned. And adrenaline helps us proceed and prepare to either run away or fight. And of course, neither of those actions are appropriate in today's world. When we have ongoing stress that isn't managed appropriately, then we see additional hormones pushed into the body, specifically cortisol and insulin. Both of these hormones have the effect of increasing our appetite. They also help us store future energy, which again, in today's world, isn't always necessary in our land of abundant food. That energy is often stored along the abdominal area, so we get an increase in our girth size. These hormones also both increase cravings, specifically for fats and sugars. So this might be part of the reason when you find yourself under stress that you look at food differently and you actually start looking for things like sugary foods or fatty foods. Now that you know that, though, you can retrain yourself to avoid those foods. We've all heard the term comfort foods, and yeah, they're comfort foods, but only for a little while. After a while, you kind of get that bloated after Thanksgiving feeling. That's not so great. What happens with these comfort foods, they're often very high in simple carbohydrates and fats. They increase our glucose levels in our blood system. That's quickly followed by an increase in insulin, that hormone that we just talked about that then increases our cravings, increases the ability to store fat in the girth area, and you can see where we start getting a snowball effect with all of this. When we look at the food choices in front of you here, on the left we've got pretty good looking chocolate chip cookies, and on the right we've got broccoli. Think about after a long week, it's Friday afternoon, you haven't prepared any plans for dinner. Which of these choices looks more appealing? Many times it's the cookies. Because of that craving, that whole system in our body, because of the stress that's accumulated over the week. Another point I want to make about these two foods, we have this simple phrase called calories in, calories out, and really it is not that simple. Weight management is so complex. It is not just the amount of calories that you take in. And what our body does with these, just the example of these two different foods, is very, very different. What will happen with the extra energy that we have, how it's stored, the increase in our cravings or versus satiation early on is very different with these two foods. Just ask yourself, how many of you have ever overindulged on broccoli? So when we talk about the power of food, and I put exercise on here, we're not talking about exercise today, and I realize we have another speaker talking about exercise, but think about this in combination with great food choices. We actually have the ability to have positive gene expression. The right foods can turn on disease-preventing genes and turn off disease-promoting genes. And the wrong foods can do just the opposite. The right foods can actually reverse heart disease. When Mary and I went through nursing school, we were taught that there was no cure for heart disease. When we had a patient who was diagnosed with heart disease, it was, oh my gosh, I'm very sorry. We'll do the best we can to help maintain your status now and slow down the progress of this disease. Now we know we can reverse it. With the right treatment measures that include proper food, we can see a positive change. The same is true with diabetes. I'm talking about type 2 diabetes here, not type 1. And we also know there's solid research out there that shows that the proper foods can actually increase brain power. And I don't know about you guys, but I sure would like some more brain power. Food can also increase telomerase. Telomerase is the enzyme that increases the length of our telomeres, and the telomeres are on the end of our chromosomes, and they help determine how long we live. So I mentioned the three macronutrients, carbs, proteins, and fats, and there are a ton of different sources of carbohydrates out there. There are some specific ones that are actually better choices that I'd like to talk about. These are your whole foods. The more they look like what they look like when they grew in the ground, in a tree, wherever they grew, the more likely they are that they were not processed or processed at least very little. The more unrefined they are, the better they are for us. These foods tend to be high in fiber. So I talked about satiation. We fill up much faster with that broccoli than what we do with those chocolate chip cookies. When we feel full faster, we don't consume as much. These foods also help slow that rise in blood glucose. And then they also slow the rise of the responsive insulin. They have the protective features of the positive gene expression that I just talked about, and they can also decrease the risks of certain cancers. So your fruits, your vegetables, your nuts, your beans, these are all good choices for good carbs. When we talk about fiber, again, we talk about that satiation, kind of keeps you full feeling. We get that. Also, we have different types of fiber. The soluble fiber doesn't count as calories. It's not absorbed. It slows down the absorption of other foods that are in your gut at the same time. That slow absorption means, again, a slow rise in glucose levels followed by a slower rise in insulin levels. They also help lower cholesterol. And then there's insoluble fiber. These are the ones that help keep us regular. Some examples: beans, legumes. And when we talk about this time of the pandemic, nobody wants to be rushing into a busy store every other day to get their food. So shelf life is pretty important. This is no better realized than with beans. Beans, you can get them canned, you can get them dried. A bag of dried beans is very inexpensive. It takes a little more prep time than the canned beans do, in that you need to soak them, or you need to spend a little more time boiling them. You can soak them overnight. You can also use a pressure cooker to speed up that process. Canned beans are wonderful. You can add them to a lot of different dishes. Rinse them first, unless they have spices included. And start thinking about different ways that you can use beans and legumes. In this picture on the left, what you see is a bean patty. My daughter and I actually make a bunch of these, and then we'll stick them in the freezer. And then we've got them whenever we want to prepare something. You can add beans to your casseroles, to your stir fries, to your soups. You can throw them on a salad. Bean dips. There's a lot of different recipes for wonderful bean dips. And there's all kinds of beans that you can use in these patties as well. You look at the picture here, a bag of split green peas. You can usually pick this bag up for less than $1. And again, there's a lot of different uses for them. If you like soup, they're great in soup, but you can put them in other dishes as well. I'm going to let Mary start talking about nuts, chia, and flaxseed.
And I think it's interesting that you let me talk about nuts, considering some people actually think I'm a little crazy sometimes, but no, they're a good protein source. They also can be used to thicken any liquid. You can use them with smoothies. Anne taught me this, that you can use flaxseed and water together to make egg substitutes, and makes delicious moist cakes. The other thing I would like to share about chia seeds is I'm going to come back to that a little bit later with another slide. But the flax seed, when I used to use flaxseed, I always kept it in the freezer so that it remained fresh, or keep it in the refrigerator. Vegetables. Angela definitely started this out by saying that the colorful vegetables are so important in our diet, and yes, they are. And you can see their variety of colors, everything from green, orange, purple, yellow. A diet rich in greens protects against diabetes, aids in weight loss, and it fights cancer. And I'm a type 2 diabetic, and I can tell you that I was able to reduce my hemoglobin A1C from 7.5 to 6.6 last summer by exercise, and actually by increasing my use of vegetables. And they also boost your immune system. Vegetables, again, like what Anne said, when we were in nursing school, nobody said you could get protein from a plant. But a plant protein contains all the essential amino acids. Broccoli has more protein per calorie than many cuts of meat. And on average, 25% of the calories in vegetables are from protein. So you can definitely get protein from vegetables. Another example is quinoa. Yep, it's a vegetable. Even though the Aztecs used it, thousands of years ago, it is an excellent protein source. You can use it where you would put rice. You can add it to soup, cook with minced vegetables. This is Anne's tip. She loves to add dried cherries to everything, including coleslaw, and it's actually very good. One thing I do want to tell you about quinoa is, personally, I could not substitute oatmeal. Quinoa did not substitute oatmeal for me, and I'll tell you what I did with that. Cruciferous vegetables. It's very important to add cruciferous vegetables to your diet. They contain phytochemicals that have the unique ability to modify human hormones. They detoxify compounds. They prevent toxic compounds from binding to human DNA, and they enable cell death. in cells that have abnormal mutations and DNA damage. So cruciferous vegetables. We are encouraged to eat at least 2 servings a day. Yes, 2 servings, 1 cooked, 1 raw. Examples of cruciferous vegetables, their picture is there and they're listed. Kale, collards, broccoli, bok choy, cabbage, kohlrabi, cauliflower, rutabaga. The list goes on and on. I'm from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, so rutabaga is rutabaga. I might not be saying that correct according to some sections, but the one that I have instituted in my own diet every morning is cauliflower. I take a 1/2 cup of cauliflower, boil it, mash it, put in a 1/4 cup of oatmeal, 2 tablespoons of chia seeds, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. I boil that until it's a thick consistency, add a cup of blueberries, and that's my breakfast that I eat every morning. That was one of the ways that I decreased my hemoglobin A1C. Healthiest foods are predominantly fruits, vegetables, whole grain, legumes, and some good fats. These foods are rich in healthy carbs, fats, and proteins, and there are at least 100,000 substances in these foods that have powerful anti-cancer, anti-heart disease, and anti-aging properties. And back to Anne.
So one of the questions we frequently get when we talk about trying to introduce these foods to somebody who's not real great at getting in things like beans and cruciferous vegetables, taste is a big issue, right? So things to consider: how fresh is the food that you're choosing? Where does it come from? What spices are being used? And how is it served? When we talk about spices, our world has expanded over the last several hundred years as people have moved around the world and brought their spices with them. And we have access to many of these in today's modern world, either dried or fresh spices. So I encourage you to try some different spices. When we talk about trying different foods, it's not like it used to be where you'd have to have a whole bunch of different cookbooks in the house in order to fix up some different meals. With the access of the internet, there are a lot of healthy food choices out there, including during this time of the pandemic. You'll see sites listed specifically for pandemic easy, ready food that can be made with food that's in your pantry. Other simple ways to flavor your food include citrus fruits. You can put a little lemon or orange juice on a salad, some lemon juice in place of butter. It's really tasty. Adding some citrus, pineapple, and oranges to your stir fry, all of these can add a ton of flavor to your food. So going back to recipes, again, the internet is very helpful. It's also helpful when we're looking at these different vegetables. If you don't know what a rutabaga looks like, you can look it up online. You can get information about how to pick the right rutabaga in the supermarket, how to prepare it, what you need to do before you start cooking it, and 1,000 different recipes and ways to prepare it. Signing up for cooking classes, there are actually cooking classes on the web that you can sign up for so you can still keep your social isolation. Sharing recipes with friends and coworkers. If you have coworkers that you know really like to cook, message them and ask them for a couple of their favorite recipes. And then when we can all get back to our regular roles, maybe have a healthy potluck. That's a great way to try some different recipes that maybe you never thought of or you didn't want to take the time to prepare if you weren't sure you wouldn't like it. You can also modify recipes. Nothing says you have to follow everything strictly to the way the recipe says. If you feel like this needs some cumin or something else, go ahead and try it. And one last tip we want to make when you're picking your food is do some smart shopping. Limit your trips. There's a term we use in nursing called cluster care. When you are watching the news and you see the healthcare workers in their gowns and masks and gloves, that stuff is no fun to work in, and it's very warm, and it's a pain to put on and take off. So we do what we call cluster care. When we know we have to go into an isolation room, we think about every action we need to take while we're in there. We take all of our tools. If you forget something, you have to come out, ungown, wash, get your supplies, regown. So do the same when you're shopping. Think ahead, meal plan out your recipes and your ingredients, make your list. Make your list in the same order as what your route through the store is so that you're not forgetting things or having to backtrack. The goal is get in and get out. Vegetables and fruits, when you can get fresh vegetables, they don't have the shelf life, but some fresh vegetables are great. Remember that canned and frozen are also good options, and they have a longer shelf life. And then, of course, add your beans. So we're going to end with another picture of the beautiful Chocolate River. The first picture we had was a bit turbulent, like the times we're in. And as Angela noted, tumultuous times do settle down, and we return more to those calmer times. We talked about food as far as one way of managing your stress. Getting outdoors if you can and enjoying nature is another way. Thank you for having us. We've enjoyed doing this, and hopefully we see you all in October as well. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I was going to say, don't run away too fast. We have a whole bunch of questions. I think people are hungry, and they are really digging everything that you guys are sharing. And digging is a pun because of all the vegetable references there.
And digging out of
all
soil.
right. So first question, do you have to add something like rice and beans to get the complete protein?
Not necessarily, because remember that quinoa is another choice that, and there are other vegetables in that same family that also have the complete protein. So rice is not, unless you're talking about wild rice, which really isn't rice, it's actually a grass. Rice is not necessary. It's good. I like it, but we need to be careful about too much white rice. Beans certainly help boost the protein power of your food. And I highly recommend you get beans in regularly, not just for the protein, but for other factors as well.
All right. Next question. And I tip my hat to the bravery. I'm actually very glad they asked this question. I don't know if I would have had the guts to ask this, and maybe that's another pun. You'll see why in a second. Is there a natural way to prevent bloating when eating broccoli and beans, especially broccoli and, say, cabbage?
Yes, there is. So a couple of points I want to make. We get more into this in our longer conversation, and we can do more of this in October as well. But part of the process, part of the importance of these cruciferous vegetables and beans is what happens with the fermenting process in our intestines. And that's where you get the gassy component. We want that, but of course, that's not great when we all get back to work and have to share that, right? So a couple of things you can do is to increase your portion slowly. Your body will get used to it. You really will have less gas. In addition to that, avoid those products like Beano that are meant that you spray on your food or you add to your food to reduce the gas, because what they do is they ferment the food before it gets to your intestines, and it defeats the purpose of that whole process. So small portions, start slow, and just move forward slowly, a little bit, add a little more each week.
All right. Can you share your recipe for the cauliflower breakfast?
Sure. What I do, actually, I prepare it for 3 days. So I take 3 cups of cauliflower. I start my morning out with a cup of coffee, and because this takes a little bit of time. And I put 3 cups of cauliflower in 3 cups of water. And I boil that for at least probably 5 minutes. Then when it's soft, I mash it. Then I put in a 3/4 cup of oatmeal. And I use the oatmeal you have to cook for 5 minutes. So then I put in 3 teaspoons of cinnamon. I should probably just be putting this in ones. Just divide everything I said by 3, not to be confusing. I put in 6 tablespoons of chia seeds, and I let that boil till it's, I like my oatmeal a thick consistency. I don't like runny, but I don't like it like paste, like you could throw it and it could hit the wall and stick to it. And then I put in 3 cups of blueberries, and I use Wyman's wild blueberries. I buy them 3 pounds at a time, and they are delicious. and I hope I'm okay saying what I do. Thank you.
And I know Mary doesn't like the quinoa breakfast, but there are a lot of different recipes using quinoa as breakfast food as well.
So there are actually a few questions that we're wondering if you could recommend any recipe sites. And then there's kind of different tangents that request goes by. Some people want to know specifically for maybe whole foods, others for adding spices. But do you have some recipe sites that are some of your go-tos that you would recommend for our audience?
There's one site that comes to mind, and it's, I may not get this completely right because I don't have it in front of me. Physicians Council, and it may not be Council for Responsible Food. And gosh, I'm sorry, I'm probably mixing that up. And even though it's labeled physicians, anybody can join. It's free to join. This is a vegan site, and we're not necessarily saying that you need to go vegan to be healthy, but they do have a ton of really good recipes on there. So it's Physicians Council or Physicians Society for Responsible Medicine. And I can get that site out to everybody as well later on.
And how about that bean site?
Oh, yes, there's another one. Let me see if I can remember it. Mary's bringing it to mind now.
Bean and...
sweet... sorry, guys, you caught me off guard with this question. I wasn't prepared for it. I did have this on my other slides. Chickpea and bean. Chickpea and Bean is actually a husband and wife team, and their story is phenomenal. He was a college football star who developed diabetes and has a horrific family history of the trauma of diabetes and the changes that they made. So Chickpea and Bean is another site. They share a lot of their recipes as well. They're based out of Detroit.
All right. So you had referenced some comfort foods that particularly when people are stressed, they may gravitate towards, but they maybe shouldn't actually eat those comfort foods. What are some healthy alternatives you might recommend?
So when we talk about things like, the first thing that comes to my mind is macaroni and cheese. Everybody loves macaroni and cheese, right? Even your kids. So some other choices would be to start with some non-wheat based noodles, even maybe a quinoa based noodle. And then there's other things that you can use besides cheese. And again, this is not a non-meat, non-dairy talk, but if you want to get away from the dairy, there are things like nutritional yeast that give a nice kind of cheesy flavor. In addition to that, you might want to add maybe some ground sesame seeds or tahini, as it's known, that gives kind of a nutty flavor to it as well. That's one that comes to mind. Trying to think what I've made most recently that I really like that I substitute for other foods. I'm big with stir fries. I use a ton of vegetables. Any recipe I look at that I decide I want to make, usually the first thing I do is start adding more vegetables than what the recipe calls for. And that's one way to get more vegetables into your meals. And then in addition, if I think it's going to work out, I'm going to add some beans to it as well. There's actually a very good way to get some black beans. If you take black beans, rinse them first. Take some salsa. Either if you have homemade salsa, it's great. I have a friend who makes it. I don't have a garden, so I don't make it. But you pour some salsa on top of your black beans. You can put those either in an Instapot or you can put them in the oven. You can add some cumin to it if you like, or some other spices. Chili powder is always good. And just cook them, heat them up. The beans will actually start to pop a little bit in the oven. Or if you want to throw them in the Instant Pot pressure cooker, that works as well. That makes a great meal. You can also add onions and celery to that. Hopefully I'm not making everybody hungry here. Actually, hopefully I am making you hungry.
Yeah, we're way past that. Yeah, I think now we're just managing the hunger, I think.
Yeah.
So here's kind of a controversial question, but I'm very curious for your answer. Are eggs bad for you?
Boy, the research has gone back and forth on eggs, hasn't it? Where it stands most recently is be cautious. So, when I talk to patients about their diets, I never say eliminate everything because that's usually too difficult for people. So if you're a big egg person, maybe just cut back on them. Again, there are egg substitutes out there. If you're looking for an egg substitute, one way to reduce them is in your recipes, instead of using the egg, use the flaxseed and the water combination. And it's generally a tablespoon of ground flaxseed to 3 tablespoons of water. And that will take care of an egg use. I know Easter's coming. Everybody likes to eat those Easter eggs, right? Or at least color them. So it's tough enough as a healthcare professional to stay on top of the changing research. I can only imagine to be a consumer who has no knowledge of this, how difficult it is. So depending on where my patient is in their health, I may recommend they rarely do eggs, or I may say you're doing okay, just don't go over a couple servings of eggs a week. So I know kind of a vague answer there, but everybody's got a spectrum of health, and there are a spectrum of answers to depending on where they fit on that spectrum of health.
I can be honest and tell you that I have eliminated eggs from my diet as a diabetic, type 2 diabetic who is obese, and also have a history of heart disease. I have eliminated eggs from my diet except when I go out to eat. Then I'll have an omelet. And that's my own personal opinion. I do have some research that supports my decision, but I'm not saying everybody has to do that.
All right. And then we'll just say pretty much everybody wants to know if you're comfortable sharing your presentation with our audience. Is that something you're comfortable with? We'd be happy to include it with the follow-up materials for everyone.
Do you mean as far as the recording? I'm not sure what you're talking about.
The recording will go out. I think that they would like to reference some of the slides, so like a PDF version of your presentation.
Let me think about that, just because I have not included my references on that slide, which I can update the information where I got this information from. So okay. I could give you an updated version with my references as well, if you think that would be better.
Whatever's fine. Or, or they could just feel like they're sitting down all over again with you, and they can watch the recording. So, either way, then they'll be able to read it.
Tell you what, I'll say go ahead and do that. Just ask people to remember that this is not all my original material, and I haven't listed my references. So, okay.
Very well. Well, then, thank you very much for your presentation. A lot of questions. Obviously, it's a very hot topic, so really appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you. And when I say this is my original material, I do want to clarify it's all been, it's where I'm okay to use it. I don't want somebody to think I'm plagiarizing. Just to clarify, in our academic world, we always have to be so careful about plagiarism. So nothing's plagiarized. Please remember that.
Fair enough. I wish I had your caution sometimes. I just try to paste without formatting. That's all I worry about. But that's good. So thank you very much for your time, and also for the audience. So a lot of questions came in during that session. That's fantastic. If you think about a question, you're like, oh shoot, I really wanted to ask any of our presenters throughout the course of the day. Just because their session has ended does not mean you can't provide questions, and we'll make sure that everything gets relayed to all of our speakers. So thanks again, Anne and Mary.